6.1 Libby Ferguson. So, what is biomechanics? So, biomechanics are used within sport and exercise science to help support the performers or to help solve problems that occur. Biomechanics help to identify the optimal technique needed for a certain skill or movement, which therefore helps to enhance the athlete's performance. For example, in a sprinter, they could identify the best technique for them to reach optimal speed and potentially win the race. As well, it helps to analyse equipment such as shoes or surfaces for courts, etc. So this will help to reduce the risk of performers obtaining injuries. Biomechanics' sole purpose is to either enhance performance or reduce the risk of injury. The process that happens is the athlete performs whilst the coach observes, then the performance is analysed. Once it's been analysed, then the feedback is given back to the performer and change takes place. So next, we're talking about notational analysis. So notational analysis is an objective way of recording performance so that key elements of that performance can be quantified in a valid and consistent manner, as stated by Hughes in 2004. To perform this method, firstly a list of skills or markers that will be seen throughout the game are created, then to gather the information on observation of a game takes place. Every time something on that list occurs, a tally is added and totaled at the end of the game. This would be beneficial for coaches as they would be able to identify any weak areas that the team may have. This will then mean that the coaches can work on these areas during training, so that as a whole the team will improve in this certain area. For example, in football, if the opposition are scoring goals from free kicks or corners, then coaches can then work on defending these specific set pieces, so that next time they play a game they may not concede as many or any goals from these areas. Notational analysis was first formed in 1977 by Sanderson, who created 17 symbols for 17 different squash strokes. However, it took between 5 to 8 hours training to be able to record the data accurately. The next advancement came in 1987 by Hughes, who compared the successful versus unsuccessful performances, which was collected via a computer, meaning the researchers didn't have to go through the long training process prior to the experiment. However, now there are multiple cameras and video replays of a game where professionals are able to pick apart the performance and techniques due to these cameras in the modern day game, which makes it more which allows for an easier way of analysing the game. Adams et al. 2010 defines performance criteria as aspects of sport performance which, if performed well, should lead to successful sport performance. The amount of performance criteria varies from sport to sport, as more technical sports such as rugby will have more than a simple sport such as darts. It also depends on the position, as a goalkeeper in football, for example, is going to have different criteria to a striker. There are 3 different focus points of notational analysis that can be analysed: technical, tactical, and movement. Technical analysis is used to show where technique fails or where it excels, but it does this quantitatively, so numbers, meaning it's usually presented as frequencies or percentages. This is highly practical for coaches as well as sports scientists, as it highlights weaknesses and strengths of individual players as well as a team, meaning coaches can improve weaknesses and maintain their strengths. Tactical analysis is about highlighting the tactical patterns of play within a game, which could be performed by an individual, or it can be about analysing the tactics of the opposition and how that impacts an individual's performance. So in netball, both the centres mark one another. If the opposition are using tactics that the centre may not know, then they may not be able to mark their player appropriately and therefore will lower their performance. However, the opposition's tactics could also increase an individual's performance, as the centre could recognise or be able to read the game well and mark the player correctly, and thus increasing their performance, and could, due to a possible increase in interceptions. Lastly, movement analysis is observing a player's movement either with a camera or GPS. However, it can also be about work rate, in which case you could look at the heart rate of a player. This could be a good way for coaches to look at fitness levels of individual players and the team as a whole. These sometimes cannot be compared. For example, in football, the central midfielders arguably have to run the most, as they are both involved in the attacking play, but also have to drop back and defend. So therefore their fitness levels should be higher, whereas a goalkeeper or arguably a centre-back would have relatively low fitness levels in comparison. As well, analysis of the movements can help coaches make the training more specific to further improve the movement patterns as well as just fitness. So moving on to basketball performance criteria. For this I've chosen to observe a small forward. These players are the most adaptable players on the pitch, both offensively as well as defensively. They can shoot from outside and inside the 3-point line, as well as defensively block opponents' shots. Due to this position needing to be defensive as well as attacking, the criteria will be based around this, as the ideal player will need to be well balanced. The criteria chosen is 3-pointers, 2-pointers, offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, and layups. So what are these performance criteria? So a 3-pointer. The NBA first introduced this rule in 1979 as a way for players to gain more points for a more challenging shot, as before a player would gain 2 points for any shot regardless of where they were on the court. So officials at NBA changed the point system due to the shot being challenging and infrequently seen. As seen on the screen, above is a bird's eye view of the basketball court. The D shape at the end of the court represents the 3-point line, which is 23 feet and 9 inches away from the hoop, except at the corners where it's only 22 feet. The shot is highly relevant to the chosen position of a small forward, as one of their main roles is to score. Typically in the basketball team, the small forward is tall, which helps them out with many skills, especially the 3-pointer, as they are able to get more height on their 3-point shot, which will therefore reduce the risk of a defender potentially intercepting it whilst on its path to the hoop, making it more likely that the small forwards will score. The shots are also a good way to help the team regain a lead if they've fallen behind their opponents, due to the shot awarding the most amount of points to the team, due to it awarding them 3 points if they shoot from outside the D shape, and obviously it goes in. So next is the 2-pointer, much the same as the 3-pointer, except this time the shots are made within the 2-pointer line, so within the D shape. This is a useful shot as it's played much closer to the hoop, therefore reducing the risk of the shot missing. This again is relevant to the small forward position, as they have the task of shooting, and therefore if they shoot close to the hoop, then it reduces the chances of missing and will help their team to gain more points. The small forwards also have to be strong, due to them going up against opponents to win possession back. This is a key component needed for either rebounds, due to the small forward being an attacking as well as defensive player. So they will be involved in both types of rebounds, so the offensive and defensive rebounds. So offensive rebounds. This occurs when an offensive player misses a shot or a free throw and regains possession again of the basketball. This would be beneficial for a small forward as they can score from the rebound, potentially putting their team ahead. Whereas on the other hand, a defensive rebound. So this occurs when a defensive player gains possession of the basketball after an offensive player misses a shot or a free throw. As stated above, the small forwards are strong but also tall, which will give them an advantage when going into defensive rebound, as they'll be more likely to win the ball back and then start a counter-attack on the oppositions. So lastly, a layup. So unlike the 3 or 2-pointer, this shot isn't static, meaning the player is moving when the shot occurs. This shot is just like what it sounds. The ball is laid up onto the backboard or over the rim of the hoop and in. However, this type of shot will only award 1 point to their team. This skill also requires strength, as they may have to block opposition players off so that they don't lose the ball whilst performing the layup. Due to the small forwards being tall, there shouldn't be too much of a gap between their hand and the hoop, meaning they won't have to jump as high. This skill is needed by a small forward as it is another way to earn their team points and potentially increase their lead or put their team into the lead. So next, moving on to the method of notational analysis. So data can be connected via notational analysis in many ways, such as through a computer, video analysis, or live. Not only this, but the way that the data is recorded varies as well. So some researchers will note it down in tallies, whilst others use percentages. To perform a video analysis, the equipment that is required is a video recorder as well as a data sheet that the researcher is able to record the notes onto whilst watching the recording. However, the data sheet is also needed for any form of notational analysis. A pre-test also needs to be conducted, so this will allow the researcher to familiarise themselves with the activity, but they also need to gather some data on the performance criteria, on what the performance criteria will be used. So moving on to data collection. So this element of notational analysis is the movement element. In figure 1 are the schematics of Max's movement, which were taken during his performance. It shows clearly that he was highly active and involved within the game. In figure 2 we can see the schematics of George's movements, again taken during his performance. It also shows that he was involved with the game and highly active. However, what cannot be determined from these schematics is the distance that they both covered. However, figure 3 shows the distances that the participants of the group covered. It also shows how the live analysis compares with the video analysis. So next is the data collection sheets. So this is all the data collected from the video notational analysis presented in graph form. As seen in the graphs, I have compared 2 athletes in the 5 performance criteria. This reason for these 2 participants being compared is because George is a basketball player who already plays as a small forward and therefore can be used as a base to see what the performance criteria should be like, whereas Max is only a beginner and therefore we can compare him to someone who is more advanced to near enough a beginner. So as seen in the graphs above, George scores higher than the mean scores from the group, meaning he is ideal to compare against due to him showing the right qualities needed for this position. So these graphs, so these are the percentages that Max and George have in each skill. So these graphs show the percentages of how many successful shots or rebounds they had out of how many they'd completed. So for example, if George completed 10 shots, 10 2-pointer shots for example, and he had 8 successful ones, then his percentage would be 80%.